Hi everybody! So in my video about El Cacique Cotubanamá, I mentioned the sacred site. I'm pretty sure it's said Anamuya, but I wanted to share a little bit more about this archaeological site because unfortunately there hasn't been a lot of research on it, and because it hasn't been protected, we're losing it. The rock is being slowly eroded away. This site would have already been ancient for the Tainos. But with the passage of time, people have slowly destroyed the site. There used to be stairs that would go down to the river. But the stones of the stairs were removed in order to prevent cattle from injuring itself. With the help of Caplat, who is currently in the Dominican Republic, and he was able to send me this book, Anamuya, Patrimonio Aborigen del Este de República Dominicana. And it was written by Clenis Tavarez Martinez, and she's been desde 1984, ella labora en el Museo del Hombre Dominicano, en donde fue subdirectora y dirige el Departamento de Biología Humana desde el año 2000. In her book, she talks about several points that I found really important. One of them being this, that a pesar de la antigüedad de Anamuya, no es muy conocida entre los arqueólogos nacionales ni internacionales. And it just seems like there's not a lot of interest in keeping and preserving this site. And during her research, even though she spoke to several people who were more familiar with the site, there's not much information about the history of the site. In 1915, el arqueólogo Du Bois conoció el lugar, pero parece that he actually didn't visit the correct site by the descriptions that he gives of where he was located. Pero la primera noticia, vamos a decir, oficial del sitio se debe a Du Bois, 1955, en su obra Monumento Megalítico y Petroglifos de Higüey, República Dominicana. La misma es solo una mención de su existencia sin descripciones ni detalles. Because there's actually two sections to this archaeological site. Está esta aquí, de la roca fragmentada en dos. Apparently this, back in the day, was one whole piece. But this is volcanic rock. So it's very fragile. And because this area eventually was used for cattle, the cattle destroyed a lot of it. Here's another angle of the rock, and this is one of the images with cow dung on it. Here's a view of the rock when you come up to the site. And there's another section called Trono de la Reina, where it is filled with petroglyphs. So petroglyphs are interesting because they're not easy to make, and they're more of a 3D image of whatever form you're trying to create. And here are some examples of this art at this site. Here's another one. These are not an easy process. It takes a very long time. And what makes this even more amazing is that because this rock is volcanic, it is extremely fragile. In other words, whoever made this had to know what they were doing, because just the slightest off pressure could break the stone. The situation with El Trono de la Reina in the book, the images are very blurry. You can't really see what it is, but my understanding that it's like a cave-like structure with these kind of images all over the walls. So this is an image that gives us an example of how these petroglyphs would have been formed. So this would have been the first step, basically. Here we can see that it's not rounded. It's not 3D yet. It's just lines inside of the rock. And we can see that they use kind of like a chisel and a stone to make these. But then we would have this. So this is another rock, different rock that they're using to then form the 3D image. Not just anybody can do this. And if you notice that both images were men, it is because it was the men who made these images. The Tainos were very, I'm going to say labor divided in terms of gender. The women had their things that they were supposed to be doing, and the men had the things that they were supposed to be doing. So even though this site is full of all of these artifacts, the saddest part is what Clenis wrote up here. She says, La Española es la isla del archipiélago de las Antillas, donde existe la mayor cantidad de arte rupestre, which is the art that we just went over. En la República Dominicana es impresionante la concentración de dicho arte, lo cual corrobora este planteamiento. Up to now, we know that there's about 576 examples of this art on the island, only in la República Dominicana. And she notes how Fray Ramón Pané, who was the first European to live amongst the Taino, talks about the importance of caves for them. And as we know, most of these images or artwork is found within caves. And he talks about how he himself saw these images in 1493. And this is what he wrote here below. It says, dicen también que el sol y la luna salieron de una gruta o cave que está en el país de un cacique llamado Mausiativuel, a cuya gruta, que llaman Yobobaba, la veneran mucho y la tienen toda pintada a su modo, sin alguna figura humana. So he noted that these weren't like human figures, which is something that we see on the stone and inside el trono de la reina, pero con muchos follajes y otras cosas semejantes. In the book, that she thinks that the descriptions don't mean that these are the petroglyphs, because he says toda pintada a su modo, which we know that they also did. We see a lot of those, especially in Cuba. But through this description, he saw these things himself. I think he did, because he gives really good description of like what the forms are. So he didn't have an iPhone. Then nobody can send him this. He had to see himself. So even though we have all these images, we don't know much about them. But the information that we currently have, the archaeologists do believe that the site was a ceremonial place. Could have possibly also been a ceremonial batey. But without further study, we're not going to be able to fully determine what happened at this site. And as it notes on the bottom, I don't know if you can see all the way down there, but because there's a lack of trash in the area, meaning that it didn't seem to be used as a human settlement. Seems to obviously be a ceremonial place because of the lack of just normal human activity. But for now, we know the following. Anamuya es un lugar único en el archipiélago de las Antillas. Hasta ahora no hay reporte de un sitio igual con petroglifos hechos en una roca a nivel de superficie, ni en el país, ni en el Caribe insular.